welcome back to Philosophy for the Lockdown and Beyond. I'm Nausicaa, I'm a moral philosopher, I am not a relativist, and I am not a consequentialist. If none of this makes any sense to you, you need to go back and watch some of the earlier videos. If you understand all of that, excellent, you can continue, and today we'll be talking about deontology. So in the last video we looked at one possible moral theory, consequentialism, and this is a group of theories that do what it says on the tins. Moral theories try to tell us something about how we should behave, what is the right or wrong thing to do with respect to morality, what kind of person, what kind of people we should be. And consequentialists are the type of theories that give an answer that focuses on the consequences. Broadly speaking, consequentialist theories say we should do whatever brings about the best consequences, and then they have an account of what counts as best consequences, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, that kind of thing. Today we're going to look at an alternative normative theory, a normative theory that gives a completely different answer to the question, what should I do when faced with moral problems? If you're interested in reading more about consequentialism, I recommend Peter Singer's Practical Ethics. This is a relatively straightforward book to read because Peter Singer is very clear. He has a very concise and nicely presented argument that he gives in the first couple of chapters of the book, and then he applies this argument to a variety of different situations. It's also a very influential book. This is a very influential philosopher. Part of this book is very influential because, do you remember how he said consequentialist theories are very egalitarian? My pain and my pleasure counts as much as yours or somebody else's. I can't make a special case for myself. Peter Singer's book is quite influential because he makes the case that we can't make a special case on behalf of the human species. Everybody's interests count equally, so the interests of animals count. So when you make calculations as to what are the best consequences, you should also consider the pain and suffering and pleasure of animals. Therefore, it's been a really influential book in terms of animal rights and how we treat animals. And another aspect in which it's been influential is that it started a movement called effective altruism, according to which people try to use their resources as effectively as possible, and part of which is the suggestion that everyone should donate 10% of their salaries to charities. At the same time, if you Google Peter Singer, he's quite a controversial figure, you will find that there are a lot of people who are unhappy about his work and boycott his ideas and his talks sometimes in public. They may well be right, but I would very strongly advise you to actually read the book and see what he actually said, because a lot of the people who object to his ideas in public discourse don't understand them, haven't actually represented them correctly. So if you haven't represented his ideas correctly, your objection to them is no good. There are many things that are wrong with Peter Singer's ideas, but often they're not the kind of things that people demonstrate against him about. So worth reading. Okay, deontological theories. Like consequentialist theories, it's a group of theories that have different types of claims, but we will talk about Immanuel Kant because his ideas are very much foundational in a deontology, and if you don't grasp what he had to say, you have trouble following what maybe other deontologists have to say. Someone, somewhere, I suspect on the internet, has made a claim that a philosopher called Berger is the father of deontology, which keeps cropping up in essays that I see. I don't know who has done it, I can't find it. If you can Google it and give me the answer, I'll be really pleased because this page needs to be corrected. I'm sure Mr. Berger is a wonderful philosopher and very well known, but if you skip Immanuel Kant in favour of Berger, whoever he might be, you've really missed a fundamental bit of what deontology is about. It's good news, bad news, and even worse news when it comes to deontology. When I was an undergraduate student, I got a reading list for a moral philosophy course. I went to the bookshop and I bought the books, and this was Kant's book. Look, it's tiny. I was so happy. I thought this was going to be so easy, especially when you compare it with what was coming next. Look at this. This is Sartre, being in nothingness. It's massive. Yeah. So this compared to this, I thought, this is going to be so much fun this semester. God help me next semester when I get to Sartre. Slight deviation, I can't help myself. If you do want to read on existentialism, please skip this in favour of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. This, okay, I don't want to say bad things about Sartre, but read de Beauvoir first, and then if you have time, go to Sartre. Okay, so I got this. Even better when you look at it. Some of it is a kind of a beginning introduction by the translator, because of course originally this was written in German and I was reading it in English. And some of it is the index. So really the argument is this: how tiny is that? That's the superficial good news. The bad news is that this part of the book, the introduction, is a translation of the argument. So this is the English version of the German argument, and this is the hopefully down-to-earth English account of what he's trying to say, because this book is one of the most intense bits of writing that has ever been in philosophy, and you can spend ages reading it and always finding new things, and it relates in many complex ways to his other works, because Kant was a prolific writer whose writings affect a variety of areas in philosophy, not just moral philosophy. So it's very difficult to get to grips with what Kant said, and almost every sentence you have to say about him, you have to be really careful, one word out of place, and you've suddenly said something really, really silly. And there are people who spend an entire book on one word of Kant's, which is not helped by the German language. It's extremely complex in itself, and one word can express a number of different ideas. Okay, that was a roundabout way of telling you that we might not manage to do the whole of Kant's moral philosophy today. We're not even going to manage to do the whole of this book. We'll probably do half of this book in about half an hour. Sorry about that. And then we might do the other half of this book in the next video. So what is this book called? It's called The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. Just the title itself requires a 10-minute introduction. By Kant's own admission, the title is horrifying. It will tend to put people off. I know that this says the moral law. This is just the translator's name for the book. The actual book by Kant is The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. Okay, what does he mean? By groundwork, he means the basis, the introduction. This is where he's setting the foundations. He has another book called The Metaphysics of Morals, where he builds on those foundations. And that's the next book you should read if you actually fall in love with Kant. Morals is morality. Okay, we know what that is. It's an area of philosophical inquiry that has something to do with what you ought or should do. Remember the force of morality. This is going to be very, very crucial in understanding Kant. And metaphysics. We touched a little bit on what metaphysics is when we discussed relativism. Metaphysical questions are questions that go beyond physics. Physics concerns itself with the natural world, with how things are, with what we can learn through our senses. Metaphysics goes beyond that to what things are like in themselves, being as being, ontology, fundamental questions and fundamental answers about the nature of things as they are in themselves, answers that we can only grasp through reason. This is going to be very important. We're going to say a lot more about what it means to understand something through reason and what other possibilities are. So in this book, Kant is looking for a universal truth about morality. He wants a truth that will be accepted by everybody as the truth of morality. And he's looking for the supreme principle of morality. Spoiler, this is going to be the categorical imperative. We'll probably have to discuss that in the next video. We won't have time to get as far as revealing the categorical imperative, but that's what the supreme principle of morality is. Okay, so he starts off, he talks about two different ways in which philosophers tend to think about how we can know things, a priori and a posteriori. A posteriori just means information that comes through the senses. I learn about the world out there through what I see and I hear and how I experience things. Now, this is a perfectly good way of learning things, requiring knowledge, but it's also unreliable because my senses often deceive me. Let me give you a slightly sad example. I have a lot of dogs, but my first dog was a very special dog. She was particularly intelligent, she was particularly sweet, she was particularly bonded with me. She died when she was 15, she had a really long life, but 10 years later I still miss her. And occasionally out of the corner of my eye, especially when the dogs are moving, I think I see her amongst them. And it takes me a few seconds to realise that it was just my desire to see her that creates a sort of, I don't know, optical illusion that she's there amongst the other dogs. So this is the problem with this kind of knowledge that comes a posteriori through the senses. A much stronger claim to knowledge comes from a priori, from reason. If I were to sit in a darkened room and close my eyes and think about what I could prove using the power of reason alone, I'd arrive at a much stronger type of truth. That's the kind of truth that Kant wants for morality. He wants to give us an account of what is required of us morally, such that anyone with reason will affirm it. Okay. Despite him admitting that the title of his book is horrifying, he still thinks that what he has to say is accessible to everyone because we all have access to reason. This is a very long and complicated line of thought in philosophy that goes back to the beginnings of philosophy. The idea that reason is particularly important, that thinking about things gives us access to truths in a very strong and significant way, and in many ways that we are different from other types of animals because of our ability to reason. This is all a little bit introspective because philosophy is the act of reasoning, and surprise, surprise, philosophers think that the act of reasoning has a specific status. It's very important that reason gives us access to truth that other types of gaining knowledge do not. Okay, so he's looking for the supreme principle of morality, and he's going to get there a priori. That means, effectively, he's saying, once he tells you the answer, if you think about it, you will agree with him that it is correct. Okay, this is a sort of slightly facetious way of putting it. So he starts looking for the principle of morality, and first he rejects 3 different places where we could find the principle of morality. The first one is God. Now, Kant was a religious person himself, and religion played a big part in his life, but he doesn't think it is fair to appeal to God as the source of morality, because that makes morality conditional. That means morality comes from something else, the being, God, who gives us these commands. That means anybody who doesn't believe in God, or doesn't believe in the same God as me, wouldn't believe in morality. And that is problematic. That means the force of morality doesn't come from itself, it comes externally from God. And if you don't believe in God, then you don't believe in the force of morality. You're not pushed to do the right thing. We touched upon this in the little video on religion and morality, the tiny little bonus video, if you happen to watch this one. So despite being religious, he rejects an appeal to God as the foundation of morality. He also rejects an appeal to teleology. Teleology is a Greek word, comes from the Greek for telos, which is an end. This is the type of theory that says that we have a function, a purpose, we're moving towards an end. And it derives morality from this idea, from our function and from our purpose as human beings. This is the sort of theory that's proposed by Aristotle. We'll talk about Aristotle and virtue ethics. Yay, finally, when we're finished with Kant. Okay, so he rejects teleological accounts of morality because, again, they're conditional on this idea of an end. They make morality dependent on something else, and it can't be the sort of thing that's dependent on something else. Equally, he rejects appeals to utility. Utility is pleasure, sort of functionality, that kind of concept, because again, this is an end towards which morality is conditional rather than being of value in and of itself. So So morality has to be an unconditional thing, yeah? Something that is good unconditionally without being dependent on something else. And what is that? This is the good will. Okay. The will is internal to the agent. Remember in the beginning of the consequentialist video, we talked about the bundle of things that is the action. Here I am, an agent, a being who expresses themselves into their actions. I'm not a stone. Behind me is everything that brought me here. Here I am in the moment where I make the decision. And there is the world which I affect with my actions and the consequences of what I do. Consequentialists are interested in that bit, what happens out there in the world. Deontologists are interested in this bit, what is inside me. My intentions, my motives, my will. Not so much what I bring about, but what I intend to bring about. Okay? So if there is a drowning baby, and I intend to save the drowning baby, this is what is morally worthy. This is what I ought to be praised for, even if, in practice, I don't manage to save the drowning baby. Okay, there's a very famous quote. This is the only quote I'll read you by Kant, I promise. I know quotes can get a little bit boring quite quickly. This is the only one I'll read you, because it's worth having heard a little bit of Kant, even in translation. This quote contains the word niggardly in it, and that can sound an upsetting word to people because phonetically it sounds very much like the racial slur. Etymologically it's a completely different word. It's a much older word than the racial slur, and it means miserly. It has nothing to do with the meaning of black, which was what etymologically leads to the racial slur. That's why it has been kept in translations of Kant. The language is very interesting, very convoluted, okay? So here he's talking about the goodwill and how it's good unconditionally. I'll read you the quote and I'll tell you what it means. Even if, by some special disfavour of destiny, or by the niggardly endowment of stepmotherly nature, this will is entirely lacking in power to carry out its intentions, if by its utmost effort it still accomplishes nothing, and only goodwill is left, not admittedly as a mere wish, but as the straining of every means, so far as they are in our control, even then it would still shine like a jewel for its own sake as something which has its full value in itself. The value of the goodwill is in itself and not in the consequences that it brings about in the world. This is a massive disagreement between consequentialists and deontologists. Very often, at the end of presenting various moral theories, students, especially students who work in practical professions, in the medical profession very often, come back to me and say, well, why do we have to pick one or the other? Why couldn't I be a consequentialist here and a deontologist there? You can do whatever you like, but if you want to be consistent, you can't opt for both of these theories because they have at their heart a completely contradictory claim. For the consequentialist, the moral worth is there in the consequences of what you bring about. But the deontologist is here, it's inside you, it's in the goodwill and what you intend and what your motives are. And this, Kant says, very clearly, and he doesn't budge. Kant is the type of philosopher who fully commits to where reason leads him. He's not going to back down from this claim. He tells you, even if, by some special disfavour of destiny, what is the disfavour of destiny? Disfavour of destiny is just bad luck. You know, you set out to do things and sometimes they don't turn out as you wanted them to just because of bad luck. There's the drowning baby, you fully intend to save it, but it takes you ages to take off your boots to jump in the water to save the baby. Had you worn your flip-flops, it would have been a different story. Now, this is just bad luck that prevented you from expressing your goodwill in your actions. And Kant says, I don't care. I don't care how much bad luck happens out there in the world. What matters is here, inside you. That's an appealing idea. It protects my agency from luck, because it seems really unfair to say to me, well, you're not worth anything because you didn't save the baby. That wasn't my fault. It took me forever to take my boots off. I'm not responsible for that. How was I supposed to know I would need to save babies today to wear my flip-flops? The important thing is that I wished, I tried to save the baby internally. Yes, my motives were pushing me in the correct direction, as opposed to the guy who was sitting there going, I can't be bothered today, I have better things to do with my life. Okay. So Kant says, it doesn't matter what happens out there. He protects us from the luck that affects morality out in the world, because the value, the worth, is inside the individual. That is a very appealing idea. Nobody wants to be judged morally for things that were out of their control, whether they're wearing boots or flip-flops today. They want to be judged for what was under their control, the decision to save the baby, even if they didn't manage to do it. But Kant goes even further, and this is the important bit. Even, he says, if you're prevented from acting by the niggardly endowment of stepmotherly nature. What does he mean by this? He means here that if you are naturally disinclined to act morally, even that shouldn't matter. Some people, we're all born with natural tendencies towards something or other. Some people are born with natural tendencies that happen to favour doing the right thing. A child that has an even-tempered temperament, that is empathic towards other children, will find it easier to share the red truck and to not hit other kids. A child that's quick to anger, a child whose sentiments tend to focus on what is unfair towards him and what the world owes him, will find it much more difficult to share the red truck and not to hit when angry. That means that our very nature, our natural tendencies, push or pull towards morality. Now Kant says even that doesn't matter. He doesn't care if naturally you are the grumpiest, most evil I don't think there is a verb for what I mean. Evil regarding type of person. Naturally, you can't help it. You can't help your nature. You can't help how you were born. He doesn't care about that, because that doesn't matter. The act of affirming the goodwill goes beyond natural tendencies. It has nothing to do with whether you're quick to anger or empathic towards other people. This has to do with a reason which is available to everyone. If you really think about it, you'll see why this is the right thing to do, because it is affirmed by reason. Okay. The goodness of the goodwill is autonomous. It doesn't depend on anything else. It is good in itself. That means that the goodness doesn't depend on the consequences that you bring about, and it doesn't depend on desires. Desires for Kant don't matter. You could end up having all sorts of subversive desires, but they're not important. Again, here there's a long and complicated history about the relationship between reason and desires. Reason tells you something about how things are. Desire tells you something about how things ought to be. Look at this modern way of distinguishing between beliefs and desires. If I have a belief that the bakery is open during lockdown, and then I discover that in fact the bakery is closed during lockdown, I have to change my belief. If I have a desire to eat bread, and then I discover that the bakery is closed, I still have the desire. Okay? The desire stands in a different relationship to the world than the belief. There are philosophers who think that desires are suspect, that we should be worried about emotions and desires, that they should be harnessed to do the work of reason, but controlled by reason, put basically in chains and kept in the right road. Plato. There are philosophers who think that we should do away with all desires. Stoics, unaffected by any desire whatsoever because they're all subversive. Kant follows in this Stoic tradition of complete mistrust of desires. The good will manifests itself as good irrespective of desires. We'll come back to this idea. Okay. What desires do, though, is they make us imperfect rational beings. If we didn't have any desires, it would be really easy for us to exercise our reason and see the force of the moral law, of the categorical imperative. But because these desires are subversive and pull us in the wrong direction, we're fallible and we make mistakes. Because we are imperfectly rational beings, we need to act against our desires, protect ourselves from these subversive desires, and act in accordance with duty. Acting in accordance with duty is synonymous with acting with a good will. What does acting out of duty mean? Okay, you can see Kant has so many ideas. There's so many things that need definition and clarification. It is such an intense project. Acting out of duty. Two things it is not, okay? It is not about following a legal system or customs. This idea that you do your duty, the content of the duty is not to be found in whatever law your society has passed or whatever custom you have, because these things can be entirely subjective. Okay, they're not necessarily in accordance with reason. After all, the Nazis passed perfectly legitimate, as in legal laws, subjugating an entire part of their citizens for entirely arbitrary reasons relating to their choice of religion. That doesn't make that law morally right. So, even though it was legally correct at the time. So, acting out of duty cannot be the same as following a law or a custom. Remember, all of this has to be unconditional. It can't be dependent on anything else. And it cannot be about consequences. You don't act out of duty because you're worried about the consequences. Here's an example that shows this. Imagine there's a shopkeeper who always gives the correct change. He never cheats on his customers, he never pockets any of the change. He's always behaving in a just manner, giving the right amount of money back. But it is possible that this person is still not acting out of duty. What he's doing could be compatible with duty, but he could be doing it because of the wrong motive. If he's giving the correct change because there is a camera and he knows he's being watched and he knows that as soon as he cheats he's going to get caught and there are going to be terrible consequences for him, he happens to be doing the right thing but for the wrong reason. To act out of duty is to give the right change every time because it is the right thing to do, and regardless of whether the camera is working or not. On the day when the camera is broken, the person acting out of duty would still do the right thing. The person acting with duty will not do the right thing. To act out of duty then is not to act because of the consequences and not to act out of emotion. This is going to be very critical when we come to discuss one of the objections against consequentialism. Remember, this is going to be the objection which has to do with visiting your sick aunt. We'll come back to this. But for now, all you need to know is that to act out of duty is to see the necessity of morality not as conditional towards an end, some consequences that we're to bring about, and not because one happens to have or not to have natural inclinations and desires that happen to be compatible with duty. Okay. How do we know about this? How do we know whether someone has the goodwill and is acting out of duty? We do not. We have no idea whether somebody's acting out of duty. And this is not just because of practical reasons. You know, I talked about this act, what happened before, where I am now, what I do. In practice, when we observe other people, all we know about them is the results of their actions, what we see them do. We don't really know anything about what's going on inside. When you see the shopkeeper giving you the correct change, you have no idea if he's doing it because it's the right thing to do or because he's scared of the camera, which is on. That is a practical issue. Kant is not concerned with that. His claim is more fundamental. You cannot know even yourself if you have the goodwill, the pure affirmation of the moral law. This is a really, really bizarre claim, and it cannot be understood unless we say a whole lot of things about a very complex distinction in Kant between the noumenal and the phenomenal world. Remember a priori and a posteriori? The noumenal world is the world accessible through reason. The phenomenal world is the world accessible through the senses, through experience, a posteriori. We cannot know if in the noumenal world a person has truly acted out of duty. There, to see the force of the moral law is like a revolutionary religious conversion. It happens in one go, and you see the truth, and you feel the force. It's nothing to do with your conscience. The noumenal world. The phenomenal world is the world of gradual development, character, education, opportunities, habituating tendencies, and those kinds of things which are open to external factors and good and bad luck. But for Kant, what matters is this sudden, almost mystical revolution of seeing the power of the moral law. But all this is metaphysical. We don't know who has engaged in this conversion. Even in ourselves, we don't know if we have done this. In principle, it is possible that Hitler was the person of the goodwill, despite the horrific consequences of his actions, because we don't know what happened inside. This is not to say that Hitler did the right thing, guys. Hitler did the wrong thing. But we don't know from what people do what their motive is, and they don't know themselves. This is a very, very bizarre point and difficult to grasp without knowing more about Kantian metaphysics. And this is another source of deep unease by commentators with Kant's theory. This metaphysical distinction between the phenomenal and the noumenal world, this very mystical idea of a conversion to accept the force of the moral law for its own sake. Okay, nonetheless, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals continues, and it sets out next the categorical imperative. This is the supreme principle of morality. However, having done more than 30 minutes, I think we're going to take a break there. I need a break myself after this, and we're going to come back in the next video to do the second part of Kant on what is the categorical imperative and its three formulations, some of which may be familiar to you, and finally some objections to Kant's deontological theory and some suggestions of other deontological theories. Okay, shall see you next time.